You're listening to the Bible as literature.
Hi, this is Father Mark Boulos, and you are listening to Tanazi Tuesdays with the Bible as Literature podcast. You know that Tanazi Tuesdays is back because I am hiding from the scalding heat of the biblical sun. I know I'm in Minnesota, but I feel like I'm in the Levant because Tanazi Tuesdays is back. In this episode, Father Paul asserts that the prophetic function, particularly within the clergy, is crucial for dismantling entrenched religious practices and ideologies that contradict the proposition of the biblical text. In a provocative analysis, Father Paul contends that the church's fixation on orthodoxy has overshadowed the biblical emphasis on orthopraxy, right practice, as heard in Paul's criticism of Peter for not walking correctly in Galatians. Father Paul challenges modern clergy to abandon the use of terms and practices not found in the Bible, arguing that they perpetuate a false security among believers, similar to the misguided faith in the temple criticized by Jeremiah, or the misuse of scriptures, such as the book of Joshua currently unfolding in Gaza. Through this lens, Father Paul calls for a radical disruption of the church's understanding and proclamation of the biblical text, urging clergy to submit to the prophetic command to dismantle and deconstruct the false logic and practices that have become entrenched in the life of the modern church. It is my honor to introduce Father Paul on the Bible as Literature podcast, Tanazi Tuesdays.
Ultimately, the solution is to disrupt all that through the prophetic word. And I made my comments in one of the fora about the stress on the uprooting and destruction and so on. You have 6 terms and then I went on to Corinthians and Ephesians, that ultimately Jesus is the foundation, but then in Ephesians, the foundation are the apostles and the prophets. And then Jesus is the cornerstone, which is that ultimately it will happen at the end. Even a buddy of mine sent me a YouTube by John Baer where he speaks like that ultimately you don't know what the church is until the end of times. And we all know where he got it from. That's the way we have, and that ultimately is the mission, especially of the priest clergy that parallel the prophets, as I showed in the epistle to the Corinthians. People mix between prophet and teacher. One should be very careful. A prophet is the one who speaks within the congregation. But if his message is to destroy it, then destroy it as conceived in the mind of the people, logically, because your logic is reflected in your actions. It's the way you behave. I mean, look at a young ordained Orthodox priest. Nowadays, you can be ordained in the 20s, although canonically you may not be ordained until 33. And then you start stretching your hand so that the 80-year-old man and the 70-year-old woman would kiss your hand, which is ridiculous in the Middle East. But then we sacralize everything. But the Levites, and I dealt with this in my latest podcasts, a long stretch in the book of Leviticus, where their mission is to carry the Ark of the Covenant, the tent of in which there is the Torah. And in the text in Deuteronomy 17 specifically, the Levitical priests have a combination of these two roots. And the king is supposed to make a copy. He may not have the original for him to abide by. And in Jeremiah, very early on, Jeremiah, the city is destroyed the moment God addresses Jeremiah as his holy city. It's a plain Arabic, English, French, Hebrew, any language. And it is Jeremiah that is surrounded. And I keep telling the people, watch out. Chapter 1 is not about the siege of Jerusalem. It is about the siege of Jeremiah by Jerusalem at the time when Nebuchadnezzar was besieging Jerusalem. In other words, the siege of Jerusalem is just a time frame. It's like you would say 1870. But the topic is the besieging of Jeremiah, which is the city of God. And that's how I perceive the Word became flesh, and the Word, it struck its tent amongst us. This is Jeremianic, the terminology. It has nothing to do with incarnation. With the mention of incarnation, I move to the production of words that fit this philosophical presupposition that are not found in the Bible. And very early on, you have Trinity. Very early on. Although the text does not say Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, but it's a God, wisdom, word, and spirit/wisdom. But that term became central. There is no Christian that doesn't talk like that. And it's not to be found in the Bible. The other one is incarnation, or becoming man. Again, to open the way for us that we can become divine, because Jesus was God and man and so on. And remember the entire debate about the two natures, and then when it was not solved, they went into the two wills. It's unbelievable, unbelievable. For me, many of my hearers will be making fun of me, and I accept that. I knew it long time ago, but I'm going to repeat the point that you may not use terminology. As an aside here, you know how I critique very often when we refer to ourselves as apostles. Apostle to America, and we are apostles. This is not allowed. The apostles are those who saw Jesus, to whom Jesus appeared. Commission. That's why in the book of Revelation, the new city it has 12 doors, which are the 12 apostles, and 12 is obviously metaphoric. They are unrepeatable. And by doing this, my criticism is the following, that by doing this, you equalize between apostles, prophets, and teachers. Why didn't Paul use only one term? No, he differentiates and he carries it into Ephesians, where he says apostles and prophets. And addressing my brother clergy. So ultimately, when you stand to speak to your congregation, you have to dismantle. I mean, both Catholics and Protestants have this in front. In a few places before their churches, the statue, obviously statue, of Jeremiah. And his text is precisely from Jeremiah chapter 7. Don't imagine that you can enter there to the temple and you will be protected. I mean, people express that, but we like to use the word orthodoxy again. I mean, if you want to push the issue in the Bible, you say it's about orthopraxy, not orthodoxy. You have to walk correctly. Actually, orthopraxy, ortho-walking, is found in 2 Galatians, and that's the criticism of Paul against Peter, that he was not orthopodun. It's written in plain Greek. He was not walking according to the agreement at the beginning of the chapter. So, you may not have orthopraxy per se, but you have ortho-walking. But you don't have orthodoxy. And my suggestion is that the priests should start, at least from the pulpit, to not use this terminology that is not found in the Bible. Because once you use it, you're locking the whole message in conjunction with these assumed, like ask any Orthodox what's incarnation, Trinity, and so on. They start answering you, starting with the age of 9, 10. And thus that becomes the reference in their mind. And one has to disrupt that. Very nice text that I like to quote all the time. Come to Bethel and sin, come to Gilgal and sin the more. I mean, it's unbelievable. Which priests can afford to say this on Sunday morning or on feast days to his congregation? It cannot be. Well, it is in the Bible. God cannot create a tree and then tell you not to eat out of it. I mean, well, he did it. It's the whole thing in your mind. Because for these people, logos, logi, are mental realities, ideal. I like the Greek because the ideal world is around the logos, or God and his logos. And that's why humans stressed that. You remember how so much trouble they had until science forced their hand to speak about the language of the whales and the seals, because technically they would say only the human being uses language. And then they discovered that elephants do that, and others, they have ways. What's the language? Is a bridge of communication. So this arrogance that irritates my eldest Jalal, who is into, animals and ecology and so on. That's what he likes the most about my teaching. He calls it my teaching. Although I keep repeating that the Bible didn't know what ecology is. It's just don't think highly of yourself. And that's why in my latest book, I took time to work on Psalm 8, 9, 10 that should be read together, and not just the beginning of Psalm 8 that praise the man whom you made a little bit less than the gods or the angels. And so it culminates with the judgment, and I read the Psalms 8, 9, 10 as parallel to Psalm 82. Anyway, all these things, I don't know what to say more except to keep them somewhere, but our third book should bring new material to the false path of politics and philosophy that we all know are interconnected, especially if you follow the news nowadays about Ukraine and Gaza. They are interconnected. See how the book of Joshua is mishandled because it is read on its own as the culmination of the promise of God. But then Joshua destroyed cities and then build them again or build new cities, exactly what's happening in Gaza today. And then you have to wait until Ezekiel. Remember, Joshua is a prophetic book in the Hebrew canon. And Ezekiel is the last among Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Then Malachi at the end, he says, only the good guys will enter the land. However, watch out. They better behave in the land, otherwise they'll be in trouble. That's the way I see things. You hijack You could see it in the story of Michelangelo and his Pope and so on, how they congregated, with the art and so on to make the Sistine Chapel, where woman doesn't appear. It's a hijacking of the biblical text where God created man, male and female, and then you say only male, and then God appeared as a male. Because it can't be otherwise. If the male man is in his image, then he has to look. And that's what we do with the icons, We project. So Alexandria was the precursor of Oxford, Cambridge, Yale, Harvard, Emory, and so on, and academia. I mean, look in the 20th century, 21st century, how many Orthodox yearn to have their work published by Oxford University Press. It's their greatest honor.
You've just heard the Bible as literature. Thanks for listening.
The Bible as Literature is a production of the Ephesus School Network.